And welcome to the first ever recording. This is very exciting of Look Both Ways with David and Wes. We're really happy that you are here with us on this journey. My name is David Zipper. I am a senior fellow at the MIT Mobility Initiative and a frequent writer on all kinds of transportation topics. And who is this bearded man I'm with?
I am Wes Marshall. I'm a professor of civil engineering at the University of Colorado, Denver. You may or may not know me from the book Killed by a Traffic Engineer or from a lot of my research that kind of goes hand in hand with that.
This is our first episode, and Wes and I are learning as we go. So we really appreciate you being here with us. And there's going to be an audio version of this podcast that'll be distributed soon after. But before we jump into a few topics that we want to discuss with you about transportation, I thought it'd be useful to just give a little bit of context for where this idea came from and what you can expect from Look Both Ways. So, Wes, this was your idea, actually. You're the one who first floated it. So do you want to give some backstory?
Yeah, so David and I were in Toronto for the Good Roads conference, and Good Roads is quite an old organization in terms of transportation. I think they go back more than 100 years to like the biking movement and the Good Roads back then in Ontario, Canada. So we were in Toronto. And we both did our big talk, but separately, and this happens quite often, they put you on a panel session. So David and I were on a panel with Jacqueline Hayward, the director of transportation for Toronto, and it was Lanrick Bennett. He's with the University of Toronto. He was the moderator of it, and in my experience, the way a lot of those panels tend to go is that the moderator will ask the questions, then like sort of everybody takes a turn answering, and there's little to no overlap. Um, with that one, it just came across very differently. Like there was a lot of back and forth. I got immediately after multiple people said that David and I had a good rapport together. Um, and this is also a conference where the folks there have some fun after. So David and I were invited to this dinner, had a few drinks, we're talking, and it felt a little bit. The conversations we were having, it reminded me of that Seinfeld episode where George and Jerry are pitching the show. And Jerry's like, well, what's the show about? And George's like, it's this conversation right here, like this. And that's what it sort of felt like as we were sort of talking that night. Like, what could the show be about? It's like this. So I brought it up as a potential idea. We put it on the back burner. And I think a couple months later, you emailed me and said that you might actually be serious. And I was like, well, I was kind of joking, but maybe we could try this. And one thing led to another. And here we are tonight.
Well, I hope you're George in that episode. I'm just going to throw that out there. I am a Yankees fan, but you can be George. Um, no, I think no. The idea sort of has been kicked around by us for a little while now, and I think part of the appeal, as we've talked about it, is just being able to hang out with each other and with you and talk through some interesting transportation ideas that we're mulling over and developing. But at the same time, too, I think Wes and I, we've gotten to know each other a bit. I think we approach a lot of transportation issues through a similar lens, in that I don't think either of us are ideologues. We don't love cars or hate cars, but we do feel like there are a set of principles that should underpin our transportation network in terms of being efficient and being safe and being clean. And when you just sort of think about things logically and you apply what we know from academic research, we're pretty far away from that. So I think we want to sort of like poke and prod at transportation through that kind of hopefully sort of pragmatic lens. Or do you disagree already, Wes?
No, I'd also say that one of the things I noticed when you gave your keynote is like even though we were attacking the same problems, like you were doing it from a much different perspective, like talking about very different things than I was talking about in mine. Like we did overlap in a couple small places, but it wasn't like the same thing. So I thought
Yeah.
that's a useful thing to think about too as we push ahead.
Well, for those who are curious, I would think my keynote was about carb load, which I think is a term I came up with, although I'm never totally sure about that. And then Wes, you're talking about how to kill someone as a traffic engineer, right?
Or how
That's
not to, ideally.
exactly. So the structure of this and for the foreseeable future, additional podcasts will be as follows. We're going to kick things off with a topic of the news where we'll discuss that for a little bit. And then each one of us, Wes and I, will suggest one topic that we'd like to bring to your attention because we're thinking about it, or we think it's interesting or compelling in some form or fashion. And then we have a little bit of a fun sign off that I won't give away just yet, but we're thinking these will be half hour, 45-minute sessions. And for what it's worth, the next one's going to be in 2 weeks on July 31st. So, Wes, unless you have anything to add, I'm ready to jump in.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So, the news item. The topic from the news to discuss today is one that, in this case, is one I actually wrote about last week, but it is fare free transit, which is the centerpiece of Zoran Mamdani's sort of transportation plan for New York City. For those who don't know Mamdani, he just won recently the nomination to be the Democratic nominee for the next mayor of New York. I've met him before. I think he's super sharp. He has a lot of really good ideas around transportation, like more bus lanes and like using cameras to enforce bike lanes. Really good stuff. He cares about transportation, but his flagship idea is to completely eliminate fares on buses across New York City at a cost that he claims would be about $600 million a year. I've heard other estimates from people like Eric Goldwyn at NYU that it's over $1 billion per year. And the claim from Mamdani's campaign is that this would be great because it's a drop in the bucket for New York City's budget, like less than 1%. It would be a way of making New York City more affordable, and it would really support people who are low income because bus riders do tend to have lower incomes. And it could even speed up bus service because people no longer have to swipe their fare cards as they're boarding or paying cash. I respect Mamdani. I don't agree. I think it's a really bad idea for New York City and for big cities. And you can read my Slate article if you're curious why. I'm not going to go into detail, but I will simply say that $1 billion a year or 600 million a year is a ton of money, a ton of money, and it could be spent providing fast, frequent, reliable bus service, like more buses, better maintenance, more bus lines. Could also provide 6-minute subway service at a cost well below $1 billion a year. And when you talk to residents of a variety of different cities, including low income residents, they generally say that fast, frequent, reliable service matters more than how cheap it is. So I wrote about this. I thought it was sort of like a policy analysis. I said some nice things about Mamdani, and it was just a dog pile on Blue Sky. At least I don't remember the last time I've been told to eat shit so many times in a 24-hour period. And I think part of that's just like Mamdani is a sort of like a special person right now to many people on the left, and anything that's critical of anything touching him is verboten. But fare free transit does bring up a lot of strong feelings. So I will kick it over to you, Wes. Am I wrong to say that fare free is the wrong priority for a big city like New York?
So it's hard to disagree with the idea that 6-minute headways would make a bigger difference. It's hard to disagree with the fact that this money could be better spent on things like that to actually increase the usefulness of transit for people. At the same time, as a researcher, I would love to see them try it just to see how it turns out, just to understand. Because as far as I can tell, it's never been tried in any city nearly as big as New York. Like we did it in Denver for a month and then 2 months. Kansas City tried it. Boston did it for various routes. So it's not been tried at this scale, especially in the United States. So,
but it's been tried. Like in your city, like you're in Denver. I live in Washington D.C.
Yes.
If folks are curious, by the way. Like I think the campaign in Denver was called Zero Fare for Better Air. Isn't that right?
I think it's zero fare for clean air.
Well, sure, zero fare for clean air. That's fair. No pun intended. But the thing is, like, no fare free experiment that I've seen anywhere has done anything to reduce driving.
Well,
and if you're not reducing driving, how can you have cleaner air from it?
Well, that's the misnomer, because there was actually a paper out of Boulder that showed that it didn't succeed in that. But I would still say it wasn't a failure, because that really wasn't what it was for. I mean, to think that it's going to make the air cleaner is a little ridiculous. It's like the idea that transit's going to solve congestion. And I mean, Denver has a history here too. Like when we sold the idea of this light rail system to the general public and they had to vote on it, they sold it on the idea that it would solve congestion. And it's just not true. Like congestion got worse after. Like, does it mean transit's a failure? No. Same thing with this. My experience in using it, it was fun. They did it in, I think, July the first year, and then maybe July and August the second year. It boosted ridership, especially coming out of COVID. As far as I can tell, it definitely reduced like confrontations between the people trying to collect fares and the people trying to
That's true. Bus
pay.
operators like it. Bus
Yeah.
operators do like it. That is true.
And when I'm bringing, I have three kids. When I was sort of bringing them places, like a family of five going on the train, like financially, it didn't often make sense. You could do it many other ways for cheaper because when you multiply any price by five. But subsequently, after this program went away, our transit's now free for ages 19 and under, I guess, for the foreseeable future. And like that has been something they've kept, which has been useful as well.
Yeah, I guess I've written a bunch of stories about fare free transit over the last several years, including one. I actually visited Tallinn, Estonia, which I think is the biggest city and the first major city to drop fares. Did you know? Have you studied Tallinn,
I have
Wes?
not. How do you know how big that city is by offhand?
I think it's about 1 million, if I'm
Okay.
not mistaken.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that, but I want to say that. And there, the mobility professionals I interviewed there were like, it hasn't really worked. They, like in the sense that like the goal was to boost mobility for low income riders, and every city is somewhat different. And Estonia saw rapid income growth in the last decade, so a lot of people use their money to buy cars, but pretty much there's no evidence that eliminating fares led to more people to have more had to people have more mobility or to drive less, which was an explicit goal of that program. So I guess where I come out is just like, I guess I understand like you're right that like we haven't done fare free transit in a city as big as New York, but we've tried it in so many ways in so many different places, and I have yet to see it done anywhere where it reduced driving, which I admittedly is not Mamdani's main goal in New York, but where riders said, yes, this is actually more important than providing like faster, more reliable service. That seems to be consistently what they gravitate toward.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, at the same time, I would prefer to have some sort of version of fare free transit that is maybe more akin to Donald Shoup's way of thinking about parking. Like,
Hmm.
in a lot of the downtowns I see, they'll charge you more for the parking garage because that has to pay back the money to build a parking garage, but nobody really wants to park there. So the cheapest spaces are on the street. Like, so if you can fix that and make it and manage it in a way, you could do the same thing like with transit. You could do the same thing he thinks about like if the spaces are empty, then parking should be free. If they're full, then you should charge more. So you could think of some sort of system that is maybe at night when demand is low for the buses, that's when it's free. At the peak hour, not so. Or, I mean, obviously we'd have to have a easier, more seamless way to pay, but
Yeah,
it could be something in the way of certain routes are going to be ones you have to pay for. Other routes with less use are not because we want to fill up those buses.
well, we could, and there's also ways of providing free transit for those with low incomes. That's something that New York City does. A lot of
Yeah, we do
cities
that
do, and
here. A
I
lot of
think that
cities
makes
do
a
that.
lot of sense.
Yeah.
But eliminating fares, I don't know. It's something that I know has become it's a really good slogan, and it's something that I think a number of progressives have rallied around. But I have to say, like I talked to a lot of transit executives and transit professionals. I think I know one I would put in that camp. Jim Aloisi, if you're listening, who's at MIT now and used to be the head of MassDOT in Massachusetts. He loves fare free transit, but I can think of dozens upon dozens of others who are like, this is the wrong thing to do.
Well, there is plenty of research showing that like, the barrier to transit and having to pay is a real thing for a lot of people. Like I know years ago, Portland used to do a transit ambassador program where they'd like send someone to your house to basically walk you through the process, like how it actually works. I mean, so taking away the fares, even if you do it for a month or two and get people used to even just riding the bus, like figuring out where it starts, where it stops, like maybe that is worthwhile to some extent. But
Maybe.
I can't disagree with the fact that the money would probably be better spent elsewhere. I'd much rather see shorter headways. Like when I was in Zurich, like one of the amazing things about their transit system is I think the longest headway is 7 minutes. So
Yeah.
you can just walk out, never look at a schedule, and if you just miss the tram or the bus, it's at most 7 minutes before the next one comes.
And it's never delayed. Unlike in Germany, where did you know that like Swiss Rail is now refusing to let some German trains into Switzerland because they screw up the Swiss rail schedules. True story,
I
actually.
have not heard that. But
Yes.
that stuff matters. I mean, reliability matters more to me, like all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff. But I think a lot of people have sort of moved away from transit, and enticing them back with, here's some free rides, might help the cause.
All right. Well, we'll put a bookmark there. And that was a sort of friendly disagreement. I think there'll be plenty more as we continue doing this. But let's can keep going. Topic number 2 of 3 is, and this is something we'll do every episode where Wes and I will each pick a topic that we just sort of wanted to bring to attention. And Wes, you were in New Jersey. Tell us about your adventures in the Garden State.
Yeah, I was in New Jersey to give a talk in New Brunswick, and after I gave my talk, I had some free time that afternoon into the evening, and I think I had just seen somebody post something on social media about how adults should have field trips, like that should be a thing for all of us. So I literally
I
took a
support
field
that.
trip to Hoboken to get a better look at their streets, their Vision Zero, because they are, I think, the biggest U.S. city to achieve Vision Zero for a long period of time. As far as I can tell, their last fatality was 2017. A pedestrian got hit in early that
I just
year.
have to ask, did you do this by yourself or did you drag family on this
No,
quote
no, no.
unquote
My
field trip
family
with
was
you?
was back in Denver, so I was
Smart
in.
man. Okay. Okay,
Um,
good. Keep going.
yeah. So I did go to Hoboken. I think I spent 5 hours there, and I took hundreds of pictures. And I think part of the reason too is I get questions about Hoboken all the time, so I would answer based on reading articles from people like yourself about it, as opposed to having my own in-person reaction. So this gave me a chance to really see it, think about it, see what I like, see what I don't like. I know you have not been to Hoboken, but you obviously
I
know.
know, but you can't escape it.
Yeah,
It is the Vision Zero example everybody holds up, including Pete Buttigieg when he was secretary, being like, "We can do Vision Zero. Look at Hoboken." So
right. I mean,
go
they
ahead.
have some
Yeah.
advantages. They're a small city, 60,000 people, and they have a small grid of streets. And some of the things you hear the stories about all the time are the daylighting, which is amazing to see all the different ways they do the daylighting. So what we mean by daylighting is like 25 feet back from each curb, they try not to allow parking. Sometimes they do it with rain gardens, sometimes they do it with flex posts, sometimes they do it with bulb outs, all these different ways. Sometimes they just do it with paint, and that's one of the things you notice pretty quickly is the corners where they tried to do it with paint, it didn't work. People were parking there anyways. So quickly you can say, well, we need to kind of up our game in terms of that daylighting thing. You can see how well that works. At the same time, one of the things I think I noticed too is that they could, and they can do this better than most other cities because they're so small, is they could do this pretty much everywhere. Like, I don't think I saw a corner without this. And being in a small city like that, they could do it. Another advantage I noticed is I think they only have one street that would be a state run, like a state DOT managed
Yeah.
roadway, and
Yeah.
most cities don't have that. So they definitely have some
And,
advantages, but it was still impressive to see. I mean, at the same time, there were
mhm.
some intersections where I was sort of surprised that no one has not died there in 7 years. Like, it wasn't perfect by any means, but it still was another iteration forward of some of the best cities I've seen around the U.S. at least.
No, it's interesting. It's funny. I was talking to during the NACTO conference. I was talking to a recent big city DOT director who I will not name, who said something like, effing Hoboken. And what they said, it was interesting. It was like, that freaking city makes everybody think that Vision Zero is attainable, that we actually really can eliminate crash deaths. And it just demoralizes everybody working on street safety in any other city, because if you're Hoboken, where you generally have like 2 lane streets at the most, a lot of 1 lane streets, you've got massive public transit, and you've got such density, and the streets are often 20, 25 miles per hour. I don't know exactly, but I think they're very slow, most of the neighborhood
I think
streets.
most were 20. The bigger roads were 25, and like the school zones there were 15 too, which was
Well,
noticeably different than most other places.
no, I mean it's interesting. So I moderated, excuse me, a NACTO conference with a transportation head of Hoboken some years ago, and everyone really does look to Hoboken as the model. But I think this person's point of view was like any city in Texas, any city in Florida, any city even in Pennsylvania could never emulate that. So we have sort of set this impossible expectation. I think he was really criticizing Vision Zero writ large, which is maybe a broader topic. But I don't know. You say how applicable do you think Hoboken's lessons are to other cities?
So the daylighting is definitely one that could apply. The one of the interesting things for me too is the one-way streets aspect, because I do go to like the New Urbanism conferences quite a bit, and like that group is entirely for two-way streets, and there's a lot of good reasons behind that.
Yeah.
And a question I got recently was, what about the safety? And like, there's definitely, I think Billy Riggs and Hans Golderblum have a
Yep.
great paper on Louisville and their transition, and it shows it's safer. They don't really get into detail of the serious injury or fatal crashes, but there's not sort of enough research on that per se. But I will say, like, from my experience in looking at Hoboken, like, this was pretty much a grid of one-way streets, and it's a grid of one-way streets that were still safe because they weren't designed like most one-way streets are. Most one-way streets are designed like little highways. They're multi-lane. That leads to speeds, and that leads
Yeah.
to bad safety. Hoboken, like, even though they were one way, they were still designed to be slow. They were narrow, in the entire
Hmm.
grid of it. So, like, bigger picture, it's often not a question of like, two ways are definitely going to be safer. It's like, well, if we design one ways better, they could be safer, but we typically
Hmm.
don't.
Yeah, it's interesting. Um, should we move on to topic three?
Yeah, let's do it.
I think before I do that, I neglected to mention one thing when I ran through the run of show, which is we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So I glanced over at the YouTube page and saw lively comments, which I did not read, but hopefully they are not. Well, maybe they are piling on what I wrote in that Slate article, just because I've already dealt with it last week. It could happen again. But please do feel free to submit questions. We have some time we've set aside today, and we'll do that in the future as well, because we do want to hear from you. But I will. Maybe we can make this last one a bit quick, even because I do want to make sure there's time for questions. But a topic that I thought I would throw out there, because I know this is one that you've thought about too, Wes, is A pillars. This is another one that I wrote a story about this time in Bloomberg City Lab last week. I'll put a link in the YouTube comments in a moment. But I think I've written a lot about carb load. It's what I was talking about at that Toronto conference where Wes and I were hanging out. And I think if you're here, you probably know what carb load is, the ongoing expansion of automobiles. And there's a lot of talk for those who are aware of carb load being problematic for road safety about blind zones, because taller vehicles have bigger blind zones. There's some TV channels that have done sort of viral sections where they or segments, excuse me, where they put 8 toddlers lined up in front of a big SUV, and the poor woman sitting at
13.
the driver's seat is at 13.
It
They
was
can't see any
13.
of them. Yeah. So I
And they
think
were
the height is
toddlers. Like,
real.
these were like kids. They were not
Well, they're
like.
different. The ones I saw was toddlers. This is like something that I think like some local TV channels have realized, like, every time we do this, it goes viral. So let's keep doing
And
it.
they're
I
not even
know
using the
in
biggest cars possible too. They're using like a typical SUV.
a typical SUV.
Yeah.
No, that's true. And maybe we can share some of those in the chat as well. But if I have a chance, I'll stick them in there. But they're not hard to find if you Google it. But what I was interested was A pillars, which is, I think, an area of where there's causing blind zones that people aren't thinking as much about. And those who don't know what an A pillar is, there's no reason you need to if you're not in the auto industry. But it's basically that line of material, plastic and metal, that is the barrier between, or the dividing line between the windshield and the passenger or driver's side window. And they used to be really, really thin. Then when we started all buying SUVs during rollovers, they would get people inside would get crushed, and rollovers were a huge deal 25 years ago. Real like one of these like like rallying cries in journalism, like, oh my god, we're all going to die in a rollover. And so what happened, and this was pretty interesting, I thought, about 20 years ago, NHTSA adopted what may have been a counterproductive rule to require that every roof be able to support 3 times its weight if it's on its roof, up from 1.5 times its weight. That was done 20 years ago. And it's true now that rollover deaths are pretty much not a problem anymore. But that's really because of electronic stability control. Cars don't flip over like they used to. It doesn't really matter about the A pillars strength. But those A pillars have gotten thicker to adhere to the federal rules, and just because SUVs, as they get bigger, really do need more strength. So now
Even
you have there's a I'm sorry.
even EVs are when they're getting heavier too. It's not even strictly just
Totally.
bigger. Yeah.
Yeah. It's heavier and bigger cars means all else being equal, bigger A pillars. And there's a study by IHS and a couple others as well showing that blind zones are becoming real from the A pillars, particularly pedestrians being concealed behind them when a car is turning left and a pedestrian is basically walking in a crosswalk. So I was exploring that because to me this is an area that we need a lot more research done. We don't know a lot yet about exactly what to do with it, but it felt like a topic that hadn't really been addressed in mainstream media, which is why I wrote the article that I did. And it was nice. A lot of people were nodding along, being like, "Yeah, I've noticed this with my own car, and I hate it." So, Wes, I know you've included this in at least one of your classes, so I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So this A pillars became of interest to me, especially revolving around one particular crash type that has always bothered me. It's sort of my pet peeve. Is that sort of left turn crash with a permissive single signal as opposed to the protected one, where you're on an arterial, you're taking a left turn, and what you're trying to do is look for a gap in the oncoming traffic. It could be one lane, two lanes, but it could be like four or five lanes. You might have back pressure behind you, some car trying to make sure you get through that left turn before the light changes. But at that exact same time, we're telling pedestrians it's their turn to cross. We're putting the little white walk guy up. And not only that, like we've distracted the driver as much as we possibly can, but we put the A pillar right in between where the driver's line of sight would be to that pedestrian. And like that's the crash that drove me crazy because it ends up being categorized as a human error crash. Like that driver should have yielded the right of way to that pedestrian. I'm like, that's ridiculous. This is a systematic crash that we know is happening all over the place. Like this is something that is just not random, and that is something that we could fix, but we are choosing not to. So the A pillar is part of that story. So when I talk about that crash type in class, like I even show an example. Like it's an eighth grader from Pennsylvania. I think her name was Elena Gassler. She won. She ended up winning the science fair and won like $25,000 with basically like her invention. This is I think from 2019. It would take a video what's happening beyond the A pillar and project it onto where the A pillar was, so it would look like you can kind of see through it. Like so, we have the technology to even do stuff like an eighth grader's already done for us, but we're sort of choosing not to.
Yeah. No, I mean this is really a theme of your book to give you some credit is like we've created systems that inevitably invite problems, then we blame human error
Yeah.
for them. Another one that I find really interesting that I would fit in this category is right on red, where you've got pedestrians crossing and they have the walk signal, but you never fully have the right of way when drivers are allowed to make a right on red. You always have to be a little bit worried, and of course the drivers are looking to their over their left
Yep.
shoulder for whatever oncoming traffic might be coming. They
Right.
could easily miss somebody on the right.
Totally.
These are systemic problems in the transportation network, at least in the U.S. Right on red is insane, according to people I talk to in Europe. They don't understand how on earth we allow it, but that's a whole other issue.
That's a whole other
Um,
story.
yeah, maybe a future episode. Let's. I'm open for some questions. Wes, have you had a chance to look at the any of the questions from YouTube?
No, but I have a laptop over here where I can start seeing some. Can you see them?
I can,
All right, let's see here.
but I will let you choose the first one if you like.
Um, let's see. Let's pick one from Alex Dyer. So he is saying that most people misunderstand how the price signal of bus fares affects people. It might help on a few lower income people, but it doesn't register with a large proportion of people. What do you think about that, David?
It doesn't register with. Yeah, I think that's actually exactly right. I tried to make that point with some simple math in that Slate article that I wrote, because, well, for one thing, well, think about it this way. if a bus fare is $2 or $3, I think it's actually less than $3 in New York City, 2.90 if memory serves. Um, even if you're making relatively low wages by American standards, 15, $20 an hour, just be able to save 20 minutes is worth the equivalent. Like the valuation of time is worth $5-7. It's worth more than the fare itself. So I think like when you think about why it makes sense rationally that low income riders, but would say that they care more about reliability and speed of trips, just think about how they value time. And then when you start thinking about like why, like people sometimes puzzle, like why aren't we getting drivers to take transit when we eliminate fares? Well, I mean, if you have a car, almost definitionally, you're likely to have some income, right? Or have some wealth, and you probably have a higher valuation of your time. So eliminating a $3 fare doesn't matter. You care about being able to be able to get to where you want to go relatively quickly and without having to wait, without having to be stuck in traffic, without having to have too many stations. So it just doesn't drive mode shift, is what I would say.
This reminds me a little bit of when HOT lanes, high occupancy toll lanes, started coming to the forefront, maybe 20 years ago. I mean, this is basically an HOV lane where you could pay to get into. And at the time, people kind of derisively called them Lexus lanes because it's supposed to be like for rich people. But what I remember from around that time, like the research was saying that lower income populations still use them, still appreciate them. They didn't use them all the time, but their availability would increase what you were talking about as reliability. Like if they had to get to a place and they needed to make sure they could get there at a certain time, like being able to pay for it was still of value to the lower income populations, at least lower income populations that could afford a car. So it's relative, but I do think that reliability is a much bigger deal. In the grand scheme of things. At the same time, if you're on a bus for 10 or 20 minutes more or less, you don't make more or less money necessarily either.
Yeah. Here's a question. What kind of blind zone are you most worried about?
From a
From
car
from
standpoint?
car, I
Yeah.
assume. Yeah, from car, I assume.
Um, like the one that personally annoys me is I'm still someone that looks over my shoulder when I like change lanes, which I know not a lot of people do anymore. So like the like kind of back right, back left of SUVs, where a lot of cars now is completely covered and you can't see anything. Like having visibility in those areas is something that I personally appreciate. In terms of whether it's problematic in terms of overall safety, I'm not sure. I don't think I've ever dug into research on any particular blind zone being contributing to the worst safety outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can think of at least three kinds, from A pillars, from simple height of vehicles. Also, there's one that I'm actually quite curious about that I'm only starting to learn about called the mirror patch, which is the blind zone from the side mirror, which can be quite extensive for longer trucks in particular. Um, intuitively it makes sense to me that height would be the biggest problem, as shown by those really popular sort
Yeah.
of like TV news segments that we were referencing earlier. But I don't have any data. That's just sort of is intuitively what I would imagine.
Well, that's the one you have. I mean, there are sadly examples of this where a parent is sitting at the stop bar in front of a crosswalk in front of a school, a kid's crossing, and the parent can't see them, so they go and they hit the kid that's directly right in front of them. Like so, what I'm talking about in presentations now is making sure we set those stop bars way back in order to account for that blind zone. Like so, that's something we should be designing around, but it's also something that probably shouldn't exist in the first place.
Um, I think in the interest, because I know we want to keep these short and sweet, maybe we'll put a bookmark there. We are going to do more of these. So if you had further questions, they don't have to be about the topics we discussed, the other things too.
Yeah.
Please write them down, and we may find other ways of allowing for people to submit questions as well. Um, but before, should we do a little bit of context before we have our fun sign off, Wes? What should we do
Yeah,
next?
yeah. Why don't we, I guess, explain this segment? Because this was originally possibly a name for the podcast from the get go, but we veered off in many other directions before we landed where we did. uh, So rail drinks, like
Yeah.
this is a name I think you might have come up with that you were super keen on for a little bit, but I think when you got some feedback, people were
We're not
think.
actually alcoholics, just for the
I
record.
think
Yeah.
people were thinking this would be a drinking podcast, which we're like, well, that's not necessarily what we're going after here. So
No, but it is. We do this deliberately during a happy hour time. So we're going to end each segment with rail drinks, where each one of us will have a beverage that we will explain and do a little toast. And the idea from this, frankly, was because when we were up in Toronto hanging out one night, Wes would not stop giving me crap about drinking cider at 1 a.m. in some weird hotel room we were all hanging out. Remember that? Are you too tipsy to remember
no, I
this?
do. I totally remember that.
Yeah, you're still. Well, I'm not. My drink is not cider. I'm actually drinking something else. But why don't you go first, Wes? What are you drinking?
Um, I am drinking, I guess, the Nick Offerman Lagavulin. It's a
That's good
special.
stuff.
It's a special Ron Swanson edition of it that I've had in my cabinet for quite a bit, and I usually don't keep it at work, but here I am on an afternoon. So I'm only going to have a little bit because I am going to bike home or take the train shortly. So I have a little bit of the Ron Swanson Scotch whiskey Lagavulin.
That's very classy. And I break out something a little bit fun for the first one. This is apricot brandy from the Czech Republic, which my friend brought me
Wow.
when he visited a couple of months ago. I studied abroad in the Czech Republic way back when I was in college. This is called Marunikovice, apricot brandy. It's a favorite beverage. So cheers,
Cheers.
or na zdraví, as they say in Prague. And that is our first episode. Let me just say a couple things before we wrap. We are learning as we go, and we really welcome your feedback. So please let us know what you think. And it could be about technical elements or topics we should get into, what have you. But you can reach out to us personally, or we have a Gmail account, lookbothwayspod@gmail.com. Just lookbothwayspod@gmail. Or you can contact me through my website, which is davidzipper.com. I have a newsletter called Paved with Good Intentions. You're welcome to sign up for. Wes, do you want anyone to contact you? I'm not actually sure if you do.
Not particularly, but I also have a newsletter that's much more infrequent than David's is. And the first time I sent one out was today in probably 9 or so months. So if you go to my website, westmarshall.org, you can sign up for that. If you really need to get in touch with me, that's okay too. But
Well, hopefully that won't happen. Again, we're going to have an audio version of this that will be available in the next day or two because we know not everyone can take part live. And our next recording, because we do want to be able to give people a chance to ask questions and we like to see who's out there, is going to be on Thursday, July 31st at 6 p.m. ET.
yep, same time.
So, yep, same time, same place. So, again, thank you all for joining and hope to see you next time on Look Both Ways with David and Wes. Bye for now.
See you next time.